Hello all, and welcome back to the Pipeline Conference 2022. Hope that you've been enjoying your day. It's been full of excellent presentations and discussions. We just came from a panel about communicating the value of pipeline and how to do your best as a pipeline tech to get decisions through the executive ranks of the company and the project that you're on. Now we're going to be speaking with Doug Sherman. Doug is VP of Technology and a technical fellow at Dreamworks Animation. Now, for those of you who had the opportunity to be attendees in the PipelineX and retrospect talk earlier, it was an excellent technical dive into what Doug's going to talk to us about now, more from the leadership and influence and communication around why we take on these ambitious projects in our companies. Now, Doug, I have a long intro written for you, but we only have 30 minutes total. So I'm going to gloss over some of the parts just to make sure that in the flesh get to talk about all the important parts about the topic today. So Doug is responsible for architecting and designing solutions for PipelineX, among many other things, I'm sure. A microservices-based platform aiming to take advantage of cloud-native capabilities. Doug pursues leveraging technologies such as cloud-deployed microservices, high-scale resources, and enabling globally distributed animated film production pipelines using PipelineX. In his role, Doug captures and maintains architectural specs and guidelines. He's responsible for communication, discussion, and review with project teams and technical leads within the studio for execution. Doug is named a named inventor on multiple data storage management patents. That's not pointed out in his bio, but I found that, and I find that to be very interesting, and we may hear a bit about the data management research that he's done that's gone into those patents. Prior to joining Dreamworks, Doug served as a senior software development engineer for Data Frameworks, where he was responsible for design, creation, and deployment of an enterprise-level data management system. That system was used by some large media corporations and was later acquired along with patents by Dell. Doug was a software engineer for Disney feature animation and an applications programmer at DreamQuest Images, where he designed and wrote infrastructure and resource management software solutions. I believe, Doug, your time there may have overlapped with DreamQuest's work on Armageddon, which some of us may remember the VFX work for that. Doug, you and your team gave an excellent technically in-depth talk earlier about what PipelineX is, its microservice architecture, and how it works. In this next 20 minutes or so, please tell us more about the sentiment and the vision, about how the value of the platform is communicated with DreamWorks stakeholders and why it should exist. And how did you get PipelineX to where it is today? And with that, Doug Sherman.
Hello, everybody. I'm hoping that you're holding in and holding on. This is the last session of a very long day. So I hope I can make this interesting enough for you guys to stay to the bitter end. So yeah, how on earth did we get PipelineX to where it is now? I certainly can't take sole credit for that. There's a lot of people that worked on a lot of the organic parts of it. Everyone from the leadership of TDs that were essential in a lot of the idea generation and the integration, all the way to the development teams that put a lot of effort in, operation teams, a lot of great leadership above that helps support and sponsor all these things. So first and foremost, you talked about one of my background things that I was actually terrified to go do. I was at Disney and I got the call to go do a startup. And for anyone that's been part of that, I'm going to be honest, it scares off for me, because I was going from the comfort of a really big studio in Disney to the great unknown. I wasn't sure how much of that was going to succeed. I had big dreams and vision for it, but ironically, as much learning as I got out of that, the biggest takeaway I had that affects some of how PipelineX got to where it was actually hanging out with some of the sales guys. So I've never been a sales engineer, and up until then, I had no exposure to sales engineers other than being on the side receiving all of the sales calls, trying to sell us stuff. A huge respect out to what those people have to go do. And honestly, what I took away from that is all the strategies that they did to get someone to the table to hear out ideas and to get demos seen. And as much as that, when I got hired at Dreamworks after that startup adventure, I thought maybe those days were behind me. They sort of weren't. Being a sales engineer is actually something that was a necessary thing, I think, to get a lot of the things to where they got to. All the same sort of tactics. And I heard a little bit in the session before, which is about you definitely want to get your C-level officers and your high-level leadership people invested and involved and understanding. And all the same things I learned from those engineers. They were different people to different engineers at different times, or different leadership. Like I would watch the same sales engineer approach a leader in our company that, you know, loved to talk, loved stories. You had to kind of soft open with them, and you had to kind of gingerly step them through things. You couldn't just rush them. And then other leaders didn't want that nonsense, just wanted to get right to the chase and wanted to hear just the details as fast as they could hear them and move on. And it was really about learning how to communicate and how to play to certain personalities. They didn't play the same script twice. And to much success, I watched them just stealthily and incredibly get the attention of different people using those different techniques. So I employed that a lot, honestly. And our company actually sponsored an event, and a lot of the stuff is free. I would encourage anyone and everyone, if your organization is willing to do this, it's a lot of times, like I said, it's free, to go do these studies, and you can learn more about the people you work with and the kinds of things they like, don't like, and you can actually learn a lot about how to communicate better to different sets of people. And I don't know, I find that very valuable. Nothing technical in what I just said, right? It's all social engineering, but it was huge. So the birth of PipelineX, outside of the salesmanship of trying to introduce ideas around concepts around that, was honestly a swell of a lot of different people in a lot of positions wanting to do a thing. And a lot of it was about banding that group together to kind of concertedly try to get good and position a story in front of the right amount of people to get this sold. The start of it was some experimentation relative to the CTO we had at the time, who was Lincoln Wallen. We were two CTOs beyond where he was, but each of those subsequent CTOs shared his sort of vision, which is to allow us to do a little bit of experimentation into what would a next gen pipeline look like. We didn't just jump in and just do it all at once initially. There was a lot of early proving grounds. I think our very first thing was a layout movie surfer, which is a very simple service, the start of our whole services thing. And it was just all about what could we do in this space and where could it add value and what languages would support us in these areas. And that was the birthplace, which is another advisement I would give anybody, is don't try to change the entirety of the pipeline all in one go, because I think that's a really rough sell. What we did was we were able to sell ideas, concepts. And what was interesting is we would start talking and socializing it with other groups in the studio, and found out that they had interests and things that they wanted to do. So in alignment with our experimentation with services, we started employing the interests of the TD groups that had interest in sort of advancing to certain things that they had seen at other companies. And this is why I say I can't take credit for this whole program. Like a lot of the ideas that came in were from other companies, to be quite honest. Just great mind share from people from Rhythm & Hughes that had a system that they loved and they wished had gone a little further than it had gone before that company, in a sad way, sort of didn't live as long as I would have hoped it would have. But the spirit of a lot of what they tried to do lived on through us. And we were able to embrace some of those ideas, and the TDs that represented those ideas came in collaboration with our group that was highly spirited to try to get this more services infrastructure off the ground. And we sort of combined forces and sold our different leadership groups on the concepts and sort of came together. And that's the biggest takeaway, I would say, of the whole thing, which is it definitely took the concerted effort of lots of different teams. We had a pipeline team. Ben George is over at Animal Logic. A lot of really good ideas that he had that he helped throw in there. And he's an example of someone that we had a few people like, just highly ambitious and just was willing to put in the time and the effort to figure things out, and that ambition is what drove a lot of it forward as well. So that community of people, including the operations, we had someone that worked with us, Ali, who's now helping out at Spire, and he was a highly spirited guy that was all about how can we one up operations, and he had ambition and want and needs, and we played to his strengths to support our services. The services helped to support the things that the TDs had ambitiously wanted to do, and the pipeline teams. And that synergy of all those teams sort of coming together is honestly what gave this thing its start. There's no way that I could have come in there by myself and built this pipeline. I definitely had the luck of having a lot of spirited, ambitious people. Each one to do their own thing. What I had some success at doing is trying to figure out with leadership how to show how we could leverage all these various teams together and get some success. And honestly, kudos to our leadership. Our leadership had trust and faith in a lot of what we were trying to do and didn't see it as just a bunch of technologists goofing around. They really did believe in what we were trying to do, which is the betterment of the company, trying to achieve efficiencies, trying to achieve cost savings, all the kinds of things leaders want to hear, right? And again, I go back to having been at my startup, I, as well as some others, put a lot of effort into slide decks that were really sort of selling a product. Even though it was to ourselves, we were doing all the same sorts of things I was doing as a vendor to try to prepare and learn who we were selling to and try to hit the points that we knew that they would want to hear and report back sort of the progress and continue to validate. The other thing I'll throw in there, and then I'll pause for a moment, is the power of partnerships. I had heard in the earlier talking about, how the government and Canada can be an assist for R&D efforts, which is awesome. I would not discount the power of partnering with other companies that are complementary to what you want to do. So in the case of us, if you look at Dreamworks' history, we've had very good partnerships with companies like HP and now Lenovo. NetApp is another great partner of ours. More recently, if you've seen the news, you've seen that Microsoft, Azure, and ourselves have a partnership. All those partnerships don't just benefit us, they certainly benefit us, right? We get a lot of expertise coming in from these outside entities coming to give us an assist. Because again, as you all know at this conference, right, as much as I'd love to say the most important thing in the studio is us, is the pipeline teams. And we know it's the artists, right, and the stories that we tell at our studios. We are definitely a necessary part of that, but we are not the focal point of that. And therefore, typically, we're not funded to be a full-scale technology company. So I can't stress enough how our success has been a lot on relationship we've made with partnering groups whose ambition is to do a part of what we need. In the case of like Azure, think about them, right? They're a cloud company with cloud resource. Of course, they would love to see companies successful out there using their resources. And I think they understand as much as we do that if we combine forces, we just go that much further together. So I would encourage any of you, no matter how big or small your studio may be, is to go out there and take advantage of shows like SIGGRAPH and go to other conferences where you may have opportunity to meet up with other like-minded companies where you might be able to combine forces and do some sort of partnership to kind of build out the capacity of what you can do with your engineering teams. Because typically we're fairly small, right? And we can only do so much with the smaller teams we typically have. But as you sort of build up your stable with partners, suddenly your engineering effort can grow and you can move faster because you're bringing in expertise for potential partners. So, I mean, I know I've covered a lot of stuff, trying to sell people, the other thing about PipelineX's success is kind of the roots of what it was trying to go after. So some of the frustration that I think we've seen over the years is that as times evolved, the reality with COVID and everything else is, I believe, the days of working at a tiny little studio or a fairly mid-sized or large studio all at one physical location. This is my projection. This may or may not turn out. I don't believe that is a forever place that our companies that we all work at will follow suit with. I do think as people are acclimating to being able to live in different geographies and they enjoy living back home where they grew up or in a more affordable area, the better studios can align to that way in which people are wanting to work, the better outcome for the happiness of the people working at the studios. And honestly, the more talent your studio is going to acquire, because the talent is going to maybe seek out places that are more tolerant to that kind of thing. But what you don't want to lose is all the goodness of that sort of team and village-like kind of experience of everyone's together and communicating well. So PipelineX was always about, can we provide an experience to our users, no matter where they choose to be, so that it's very much like they're sitting in our studio. They're not penalized. We don't just hook them some files over Aspera and say, good luck. They're very much connected into the web of our workflow, and they're constantly receiving updates, and the communication is valid, and they use the same tools we use. They're not having to kind of bring their own Maya or whatever and hope for the best. Like that's an ambitious goal we had in the studio, especially with COVID, I think is getting really behind that, because I think as much as, yes, we need to chase cost savings, that will always be a thing in our industry. Finding a way to keep the most talented people in your stable, I think is critical. And that's what PipelineX was aiming to be, and that's what it is. And that's why I believe we got the sort of sponsorship and continued momentum that we have. I think, and I'm trying to stay conscious of time here. I think another thing is communication with your users. The other thing that I'll shout out to Dan Golubeski and Ray Forziati were very pioneer in a lot of their ambition to bring in UX. They are now at Netflix. I'm sure very much doing the same thing over there, which is novel for our industry. I think I brought this up a little earlier in the last talk, but this was new to me. I didn't know what a UX engineer was, to be honest with you all. And I should have. I came from a company that sold a product, but we didn't even have a UX engineer. And in those days we sold that product, it was an unusual role. But it is in every kind of sales company now, where you have someone who's out in front interviewing the consumers, in our case, the artists, perhaps the TDs that would be using the tools as well, trying to figure out what it needs to be in advance of it getting built. Because I can't tell you how many projects I've been on where we built a thing, assuming in R&D that we knew what we were doing, and we spring it on the artists or the TDs, and it's outright rejected because we missed. And had we just talked to some people, I think we would have just had so much more sooner, and we wouldn't have tripped so much. So I'll be here, here comes kind of in the theme of our earlier talk. I'm gonna bring you in a little bit on the darker side. When I first started at Dreamworks, R&D didn't talk as much to production. It just didn't happen. It was weird, but it was just sort of, R&D was true R&D. It did a lot of really great research, but for some of the more productized stuff, it didn't. But one of the most successful products I saw early on was Primo, which is our animation tool. And they made a huge concerted effort to bring the animators in early and really build it with the animators. And that made a world of difference on the acceptance of that tool. And it was to today, it's still held high as a well thought after tool. And I admired that, and I wanted that for our project. And as best as I could, I kept trying almost on a weekly, every other day basis, force myself to get in meetings with the people that would be using the pipeline, and continue to do that and continue to broaden our reach as we grow this pipeline out further. And yes, there's going to be dissenters, and there's going to be people that don't get it and are habitually wanting what they had before. But I wouldn't give up on those people, and I would continue to keep them engaged and not be tied to your own solutions. Be willing to adapt to what other people may want, even if it doesn't follow your philosophy 100%. I can tell you, myself and my teams not necessarily were 100% lockstep with the TDs and what they wanted, but we both sides made compromises for what we believed each side needed, a little give on each side of it. And I think that led to a lot of the success of the pipeline, because it wasn't any one team dominating the other teams. It was truly a round table of ideas and a lot of respect that went from person to person. And I think it's critical. I don't know how you design a pipeline without engaging folks early, without really employing true UX, having full-time people whose job it is to validate what you're doing with your consumers. And that person in that UX team having the respect and the trust of the users. Because I'll be honest too, we've had people terrified to criticize things because they thought they'd be ostracized at the studio if they spoke out negatively against anything we were doing. And that's the worst possible thing we could have. So knowing that they're trusting the UX teams and disclosing information about what they're happy with, not happy with, that goes so far in how well we've been able to get this out. That same communication channel is also with our leadership. We have every month a check-in with our C-level officers, our COO, our CTO, our head of executive of production, all the way up to the NBCU levels on some of them, including meeting with partner C-level officers like at Azure and other entities that we partner with, all communicating our progress and any kind of troubles that we've been having and things we're going to do to remedy those problems. We're very communicative, and I think that's highly important, not to drift months and months out without communicating to your leadership where you're going, what you're going to hit, if you're going to be delayed, why, and getting them invested and involved so they have some sympathy if you're dragging behind or something didn't go as well as you planned. They're in it with you. You're not springing it on them halfway through the year and you're saying, hey, we're going to be 3 months late, and they don't know why. So I've rattled off a whole lot of stuff to honestly a blank screen. So I am going to hope that some of this is landing with folks out there, and I'm gonna fish for questions and see if there's anything you want more detail on.
Doug, that's wonderful. I think we all just love listening to you talk about this topic. We do have a lot of questions.
Okay, great.
The one that's getting the most upvotes at the moment is, how do you keep the ship pointed at long-term targets while faced with immediate needs and distractions in a startup scenario?
Yeah, it's it's hard. I'll be honest. This is a place that I tend to come in more often, trying to keep a longer term vision. I will again say this isn't just me, but there are people like me at the company that we would say they're more architects, an architect for the longer vision. I'll give you a case in point of things that aren't popular today, but we have to keep an eye future wise on archiving. So no one thinks about archiving to the end of the show, right? You're like, great, we've created this incredible pipeline, and even if it's performing as good as it possibly can perform, no one wants to talk about what's 2.5 years from now when the show wraps. It's the questions, I'm sure. It's like, we want better performing things on the day-to-day, week-to-week problematic things. We don't care so much about what's 2.5 years from now. That's not here. But you have to stay disciplined, right? Because if you ignore something like archiving up into the 2.5 year marker when they're done, and you've got some of the stuff in cloud, which can be expensive, and even honestly back home, stuff sitting around and running unnecessarily. If you don't have a plan for that, and you're running into the next couple of shows while that's needing to wrap, and you don't have a plan, you're in trouble. Same to be said about just resource management in general. Everyone's most unfavorite thing to talk about, except the engineers, which we all know. Yeah, we have to think about how we remove things. We can't have everything forever iterating forward. Again, that's a subject I have to repeatedly bring up as a concern that we should all continue to talk about. And honestly, the only reason it gets talked about is because I keep putting it on those weekly agendas I keep talking about, where we meet up. Do I get the groans like, oh, well, that's not as important right now? Of course. Do I keep marching down the path of, I know we're not there yet, but yes, this will be a problem, because when we run out of disk space, then we'll wish we had this talked through. So let's try to get ahead of this. It does take some willpower and discipline to write them down, which I do. Make sure we have some project management person having it ticketed, accounted for, so that when we review the tickets, it's always there and present. And when we go through them, we say, oh yeah, that's right, we're not going to forget about that one, right? And we put a real roadmap on for it, because it will slide. If you don't roadmap it, if you don't have a project manager looking after it, things like archiving, resource management won't hit you until you've run out of disk space or the show's completed and you don't have a plan. But it's a real problem that honestly, like I said, the best way I can deal with it is you just have to keep bringing it up, have the discipline, have it written down, visible to everybody, and to keep iterating on it. But yeah, would I say it's as popular as things that would affect people more in the near term? No. So I'm unpopular when I bring them up, but it's okay. We know we need
That's probably a pretty good segue into the next question, which not to go down like a negative path, but we're looking for good advice for the attendees who are facing many of these things themselves.
Sure.
And this next question is, were there any low points with leadership during the development process where support might have waned, or where there was high uncertainty, and how do you navigate, or how did you navigate those times?
Yeah, I mean, one low point, I'll just be brazen and throw out there, is cloud, right? The fear of cloud. The leadership in the very beginning was hugely supportive of cloud. So much so, I think there were thoughts of we would go 100% in cloud. I think the reality of costs hit. We did budgeting, we did reality checks on here's what it means to bring so many workstations and servers and services, and there was the sticker shock. And I think it was like, oh my God, we shouldn't do cloud. And that was not the reaction I wanted. The reaction I wanted was not as much cloud as maybe we would do maybe in a future, but some amount of cloud. And we need to be disciplined about it, which means in a world where we used to be kind of loose, and I'll speak for Dreamworks, I won't speak for everyone, but when you have your own on-prem gear, storage and what have you, I don't know that studios think as much about that. It's plentiful, it's there, we're all good, we'll use as much as we need to use, we won't go too nuts, but it's not as thought about day to day as it should be in a cloud environment. Because in a cloud environment, there's a difference of owning your car and Ubering. When you're Ubering, suddenly you're conscious about how far you're traveling because it's tied directly to a meter. And the same is for cloud. In order to use cloud effectively, I'm convinced you have to have some amount of discipline with your production groups to be a little more conscious of the kinds of resources maybe in the past they hadn't had to be as much conscious about because it wasn't metered as much as it is. And so with leadership, it was about trying to restore some faith in, I believe there's a way with cloud, but it's a hybrid approach, and not to go so hot and cold on, nope, we're all out, we're all in. I think there's a tendency, and to be able to do that, I think you need facts and figures. This goes back to like the experiment I told you about, what we did, where we were learning about personalities. And there are certain personalities that love to see facts and figures that are very, very mathematically forward and are driven by evidence and not feels, right? Some people are driven by feels. Some people want the scientific hard facts. So the people in particular for the financial side that we had to sell on this, and to this day, we've had to really show evidence of cost and how we can control that cost, but how we need production leadership to kind of step up and allow this to happen in this way. And so it honestly was, it was a dark moment because I'm like, oh no, we're going to lose. I hope we're not going to lose this whole sort of global reach we were trying to do with this whole platform. And we had to sort of calm the panic down, but by using different methods. Mostly let's provide factual evidence of how this could work in a better way. It doesn't have to be so black and white. Other downsides was, I think this is still to this day, you have to figure out how big you want to grow your audience. So remember I told you before, I think it's so important to get leadership invested for your artist groups, everyone else to weigh in, but you can't make that circle so big that you become paralyzed, because then if I open the door to all of Dreamworks and said, what is every thousands of artists' opinions on how our new pipeline should look, we would freeze up in conversation probably for years to make sure everyone's heard. And so then you have to sort of pick and choose who gets to be in the circle. And I think there are a lot of feelings hurt and people miffed in different leadership sections of the company about, hey, how come I wasn't consulted in this? And you can't help but get negative feelings from the outside about the project if you feel excluded. And that still continues to be a hard problem, because what is that right balance of making sure enough of the leadership in Dreamworks feels included, but not so much that we're paralyzed and being able to do anything. Over the years, we've been finding a better balance of that. And as we are now on shows with this, we are increasing the pool of people that are able to weigh in on this because they're active in production and they should be weighing in on this. But that was another rocky moment, early days, where people felt really sensitive about what is this PipelineX thing? I hate it because I'm not in it. And I didn't want that. I wanted people to be in it, but I really got a lot of pushback on, we got to limit the sphere of influence on this in the beginning or else, and I could respect that. But yeah, that made it dark a lot of times with feelings on this project. And it's gotten better as people are included in. I think people tend to brighten up about it because they feel like they're heard. But yeah, that's rough. that's been a rough history for this project.
Technology can introduce so many feelings.
Yes, it's true.
Was there a point of inflection where you felt the project finally had enough buy-in to move forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think there were some trouble early days when it started. A lot of this started as separable groups. I think if I had to go back in time and say that the true pivot was, we had a separate pipeline group, a separate TD group, a separate R&D sectioned out group, all independently working on a pipeline with the banner on it, not necessarily PipelineX, but this particular outcome was what each group wanted in its own way. I think it wasn't until we had it was like a fateful day. We all got to the table. It was literally a Knights of the Round Table kind of thing. We had different leadership and different leads of those different groups all come together to say, can we all come together? And that required me actually dropping a lot of the systems that I had designed in a solidarity step of, hey, I'm in with you and we'll adopt some of the things that you guys have invented. And we will bring some of what our experiences were and convert them into services and some of the other ideas about file space abstraction. Maybe we bring that part in, we redesign it in the TDs and us and the pipe. That day, and that was some number of years ago, we rebranded. I mean, as silly as this sounds, like we had an old name called PAM, Production Asset Management. We rebranded to Core. It didn't change the group dynamics as much. We still did the same sort of things, but we also brought in people from that pipeline team and made them actual members of the team. And then instead of saying, well, it's one team that won, it was, no, we are now a newly branded team combined. And I know we keep teasing about the feels, but that was a real pivot point, and it was all about the feels. Technically, it's the same engineers. We were working on the same types of things, but everyone sort of let their guard down. There was no feeling of defeat, or we were all unioned, and that really drove the momentum forward. I never felt such a good combination of unioned effort with the studio, and leadership came closer together. Leadership of all those disparate groups all joined hands, and that helped propel us forward. So that was probably the biggest turning point of the whole thing. Not even a technical discovery. It was all social engineering that really made the difference. So I guess I can't emphasize that enough. That if your social engineering game is poor, I don't care how good your ideas are, I'm convinced you're not going to get anywhere. Like you got to have a good social engineering game to do something as big as changing a pipeline at your studio.
It's an emotional inflection that's needed,
yes,
right? To turn the tide in the direction that you want.
Yep.
At any point in time, did you feel like PipelineX was over-engineered? And if so, how did you handle that scenario and what followed?
That's funny. Yes, I think so. Now, this is my own opinion. I'm not going to stand on the ground of every leader involved in PipelineX, but I think there are plenty of parts of it that are, and I don't know that it's in a negative way. I think, and this is a hard thing to do in any given project, and this is the opening talk with Richard, right? Which is where he said, we made a lot of mistakes because we were pioneering new ground, and that's exactly us as well. We were exploring all kinds of concepts, everything from file trafficking to what is the best way that I'll give you something I personally thought was genius and didn't turn out at all. I was like, it's REST. This is so great. Any language can use this. And people hated it. Like we use Python. we don't, this is abstract to us. This is a nuisance. And up until we wrote a language wrapper around it, then it became more consumable and easier to understand. And I thought that was crazy. I had way over engineered myself some of the components because I thought, oh, look at all the flexibility. Another place that we over engineered was the idea was sound like we should be applicable to any cloud platform. We should be able to run this on Google, AWS, Azure, any other company that decides they want to be cloud tomorrow. We should just be able to instantly, that's a huge tax you pay to be good at all those, just deployment alone. Knowing how to stand your stuff up on each one of those environments is a whole chore. And we way underestimated that. And I think until we concentrated our forces on one, and that's, I'll give kudos out to Netflix on that one. They came to one of my talks earlier years ago, touting how they had a really good relationship with AWS. I was like, oh, this feels so limiting. But no, it's genius because they were very adept and skilled at that particular platform. And I think we way overshot trying to support everybody. So those are just a couple of quick examples. I think, the other thing that's challenging in PipelineX is when you start inviting people to interact with things like files outside of POSIX. We have a POSIX interface, but we also have a way to interact without needing POSIX. That requires a level of effort in an application that sometimes is reasonable because the pipeline or the application that the artist is using has a very nice, elegant set of plugin capability. And sometimes it's horrific because that application hasn't been touched by the creator of that for 10 years. And they have no intention of embracing anything other than just good old POSIX or WinFS. So I think I had a little more optimism towards how much integration into artist applications we could provide with this more services-based thing natively. And I think that was a bit of an overshoot. We had to retreat a little bit. And in fact, the original plan had no POSIX support at all. And then we baselined everything with POSIX support. It's through a virtual file system, so that's still in a sneaky way talking to our APIs, but the interface is still POSIX. And that wasn't something we originally shot out to do. And then we had to retreat back in doing in order to be able to support our apps. I still have dreams of vendors moving towards a more, what I consider modern approach of dealing with files. But until we're there, I think it was a little bit of an overshoot to just assume all artist applications would just magically integrate in, no problem. So we've had to retreat a little bit on that, but it's been fine. TDs, I mean, this whole room of TDs, right? TDs are clever as hell. And we've had some really incredible ways that people have thought up to bring this platform into application space that I wouldn't have imagined. So they've done a really good job making do with some of those limitations.
When, actually that segues kind of interestingly into this question, kind of relating those topics to perhaps cost, depending on how you measure cost. In the retrospective, you mentioned the cost of change. Was that underestimated at the beginning, or how would you suggest that's accounted for in the planning of a major technological change?
I wouldn't say we didn't see it coming, but it was a lot more than I had imagined. It goes back to that, unfortunate situation where we couldn't involve everyone. And so and I'll tell you the other thing I underestimated, which is attrition and people going from studio to studio. I naively thought, Dreamworks has a really good history of keeping its people. People love working there. But in this COVID hit, we've had, I'm sure there's a lot of other studios have had, people are coming and going now at a much more rapid pace. I sort of was hoping to take advantage of that people would have history with this project. And so as these types of newer workflows would enter into these different artist groups and TD supported areas, I assumed there to be a certain stable of TDs that were very familiar with this, that were ready to go. And when those TDs were disappearing, it's like, oh no, that's our long timers that have been, and so that part, change management gets a lot more difficult because you're now having to introduce TDs into this concept, who then in turn are supporting and introducing the artist groups into there. So that I hadn't anticipated as much because I just got spoiled with the fact that people stuck around for so long. In some ways, it's interesting now though, because with fresh minds and fresh faces, you get new perspectives and new ideas that actually better the system. And we've taken advantage of that. So whether it's the bad, there's always the good that you can spin towards. But that's certainly change management's easier, I think, when you have supportive TDs with a lot of experience in the different departments supporting what they need. I think especially in the early days, you need to lean on them. Now, of course, we don't want a whole system where it can only be run by TDs. And the ideal is that an artist has full flexibility and freedom to work in the system independently, and that's the end game. But I think early days, as people are adjusting, you really need the help of those TDs and the experiential time they've had with the system. And that's something I'm crossing my fingers. You know, we still get a stable of people to kind of stick by us and stay the course. So
wonderful. That's, I believe, great information for everyone here, and is giving them some good thoughts to have as they undertake all their various difficult efforts and heavy lifting that they'll have to do. Appreciate that. Yeah. Doug, we have reached the end of our time today. Thank you again so much. You've shared a lot from your experience and your knowledge and wisdom, although none of us have you know, we're not far enough along in our lives to have all the wisdom that we need. So there's more yet to be gained. But I think that you're telling us that that we're getting there along the way, having the right thoughts. So thanks again. Everyone, please go hang out a bit in Gather Town until the closing remarks happen in just a few minutes. Doug, I'll let you actually give us the last thought. Any last thoughts you have now that we're wrapping up the conference?
I mean, just I say this every year because I love this conference. For those that don't know, being a speaker in this, there's so much support behind the scenes. I just wish I could just bring every one of those people up here to take a bow. Like this conference is newer, right? And the amount of effort it takes to put this together is amazing. And I have just nothing but the greatest respect and just want to give a thank you on behalf of just everyone that's joining this conference for all of your volunteer time and effort. And I know it looks all smooth to everyone watching this. You have no idea. I'm like behind the scenes watching all this chatter. And it's just, if you want to see something impressive, it's just a whole bunch of TDs from a bunch of places, all in collaboration to make this thing as smooth as it was. And I will always be a supporter of this. I'm big in the community. I think we are all stronger working together and sharing as much as we can with each other. So I appreciate what this conference is trying to do. And I just thank you all. Like this is great. You guys put together a great program.
Absolutely agree. See you all in Gather Town and at the closing remarks in a few minutes. Thanks again, Doug.